Welcome to the first study guide episode in the Islam series here on Between Beliefs. My name is Carter, and I hear the perspective of someone from another faith. As I'm curious about what other people believe, I'm also using the Bible as my guide to truth, which has led to these study guide episodes. So check out that first episode in this series with my Muslim friend Sharik, as you can watch it or listen to it without any commentary. Today, you'll hear excerpts from that episode as my expert breaks it down even more. My guest is James Rayment with the Al-Maida Initiative, and he has similar goals: get Christians and Muslims talking. He'll talk a little more on what that looks like, plus where the Bible and the Quran overlap, and we'll really dig into who Muhammad was and how this all started. Today, I'm talking with James Rayment from the Al-Maida Initiative. This minister, I let him talk about it, regular conversations with Muslims in his community and beyond. And this is a study guide episode as we're going to review the conversation I had with my Muslim friend, Sharik, just to get in depth, understand a little more, maybe some of the answers that I didn't even understand what he was saying. And so, James, I guess I'd just be curious, what got you into this in the first place?
Well, for me, I grew up around Islam a little bit in the UK. Now, it's a big deal in the media right now, like how many Muslims are in the UK, but I didn't really know that many, at least not well, when I lived there. I met one girl before I moved here who I became friends with. And when I moved to America, I found myself living in a bit of a Christian bubble because England is a very sort of aggressively secular place. And I didn't like living in a bubble. So I thought I would try and get out of my Christian worldview bubble. So I decided that I'd use time at work to listen to the sacred texts of other religions so I could get a better idea of what the people around me believed. And I first went through the Book of Mormon, actually, and Pearl of Price and Doctrine and Covenants, and then decided that, well, if I want to share the gospel with people who are not Christians, which I did, because the Bible tells us to do that, I decided that Islam is the largest non-Christian worldview on the planet, and there was so little good work being done by Christians on engaging Muslims. And what I found, either it was kind of in-depth, but not all that relatable, or it was just outright polemical all the time. And there was nothing that was, friendly, but also thorough and was prepared to sort of challenge the Muslim worldview. So I decided I was going to listen through the Quran. I was going to listen through other Islamic sources like Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, which are two Hadith collections. So Hadith is like an encyclopedia of everything Muhammad said and did, categorized into topics. And then I felt convicted that was a very academic exercise. I didn't know any Muslims in my area. So I decided to crash the Muslim Student Association at the University of Washington. Walked in super awkwardly partway through one of the meetings. Everybody saw me come in. But then one guy waved me over, offered me a seat, invited me back. And then I just kept going back, and I ended up going for 6 years, becoming the longest attending member of the Muslim Student Association at the University of Washington.
Wow.
Never to sort of stir up any trouble, but to listen, learn, make friends, and then be able to have good one-on-one conversations. And so I was doing that for a while, but then everything kind of came to a head for me when I was invited to this interfaith event on campus. And usually these things are like painfully shallow, but by the grace of God, it ended up being me and 5 Muslims in the room for an hour and a half. So instead of the canned curriculum of how do we all be Americans together, when, I wasn't American at the time and neither were most of them, they just started asking me, well, how can you believe that Jesus is God and man at the same time? And how can you trust the Bible is accurate after 2,000 years? And after answering those questions, this girl called Zala said, I really want to go to church sometime, but my Christian friend never invites me.
Wow.
So I said, what? My wife and I go, come with us. In fact, you guys should all come, make it like an interfaith field trip.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh yeah, sounds good. Wasn't really expecting anything to happen. But 3 days later on Facebook, the official MSA Facebook page put together an event called MSA Goes to Church, and 50 Muslims RSVP'd as being interested.
Wow.
So that basically moved this from something I was kind of interested in on the side to being kind of my whole shtick, basically, because I saw how big the opportunity was and how we need more Christians engaging Islam.
That is so neat. That's the heart of this podcast and obviously we're going to review this conversation and talk about it, but the point is to not build a straw man argument. I really want to know what people believe truly. And so to sit down and talk with my friend Sharik, I want to talk to each other, not about each other. And so able to give him the floor and review, but I think in some of his answers, I also want to know even more in depth of maybe that next step of how you would respond. And so we'll kind of go through this, but I know I have some questions at the end for you. I know there's one story that you've shared with our friends on Cultish about this woman that you just met at a coffee shop, and you just said one thing, and what happened to her next when she went back to Saudi Arabia is a story I definitely want to get to. It's an incredible story. Hopefully you recall it too. But let's jump in here to the conversation, and I'll play a little bit of how we just kind of set things up. I asked him the elevator pitch for Islam.
But the elevator pitch to Islam, what I would tell people, Islam is a religion about submission to the will of God. That's it. It doesn't mean peace. It doesn't mean war. It doesn't mean kumbaya. It doesn't mean anything. It just means submitting to the will of God. And Islam, the Quran, provides us with the framework of how to live our lives, and we're supposed to operate within the bounds of this framework. God gives us specific rules that we're supposed to follow, but most importantly, the key element of being a Muslim is just one aspect. La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah. That you believe that there's no God except one God in the heavens. Mm-hmm. That's it. He has no partner. He has no mother. He has no wife. And that he is to be worshipped alone.
So that kind of brings out that Unitarian view, which we'll get to later, but basically there's literally only one person of God in Islam, meaning that Jesus can't be God. And we tackle more of the Jesus topic here in a little bit. But I know, just as kind of that maybe ignorant Christian, once all the Islamic stuff kind of in the news after 9/11, and then I would hear the reply, I thought I understood that Islam meant peace. So what's kind of your take on what he said Islam is?
I think he's actually summarizing that really well and, very honestly. Like Islam, yes, it literally means submission to God, and Muslim means somebody who submits. So actually, I think he did a great job summarizing that and giving an elevator pitch there.
And lastly, that the Prophet Muhammad is the final messenger of God. In order to be a Muslim, we have to affirm Christ. We have to affirm that he had a virgin birth. We have to affirm Moses, Jonah, Noah, David, all the way to Adam. Every prophet that is in the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible, we have to affirm them in order to be a Muslim, because we say that Muhammad is the last prophet. He's a seal of the prophets.
So that's where obviously we jump off at Revelation. We believe the Word of God is it. The closed canon conversation, all of that. Will you talk a little bit? We didn't get into like Muhammad and where he came from and kind of the origin story, and then maybe speak into a little bit of that about how they follow him.
Yeah. So just one thing I want to say about that clip before we get into Muhammad's origin originally, right? Muslims, as Sharik affirmed, Muslims do celebrate a lot of the biblical prophets as their own prophets as well. But this is as much room for division as it is unity in some ways, because if you look at the way the Quran presents the stories of the prophets, some of them are outright contradictory to the biblical versions of the stories. So, for example, in Genesis 18, God actually sits down in a tent with Abraham and eats with him. In the Quranic version of the story, Abraham is scared of the angels because they will not touch the food and eat the food. And he realizes there's something supernatural going on there. So what you're going to see is that with a lot of the biblical prophets, you have a lot of the sort of overarching narratives affirmed. But once you dig deeper in, almost every detail is different. So yes, we do respect and revere a lot of the same historical characters, and that is like 99% of the problem in a lot of ways, because we have straight up disagreements about who these people are and what they stood for.
Interesting. Yeah, that's the in-depth that I would not have known. You would really, I mean, your recommendation would be to read the Quran, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Read it. Read the Quran. Read the Bible. And this is my recommendation for every Christian, every Muslim. You do not need to be afraid of the truth. If Islam is the truth, you shouldn't be afraid of it. If the Bible is the truth, you should not be afraid of it, and you should not be afraid to read it. And then the same goes if one of them's in error, right? Because you have to believe that the truth of God is more powerful than the errors out there. So read them, compare them, see what you think, ask why are these things different? Why would somebody change these things? And just think about it for yourself. Do the research yourself. Don't simply take what your religious leaders have told you, but actually examine these things personally. Yeah.
Is there any... I want to have, I guess, maybe street cred. I know that the Quran, what I've understood is that it's written perfectly in Arabic, and that the English version, I don't know if they said don't do it justice, but it seems like it's kind of not as looked upon with favor. Is it? I mean, it's clearly the same message, but what is the difference there in that Arabic and English translation of the Quran?
It's not so much about the meaning, although certainly when you translate something from an original language, it like lacks some of the depth when you translate it. It's less about that and more that, I don't say this to be insulting, but almost sort of a more magical worldview around it. That the very power of the words being recited out loud is the Quran, right? So the Quran literally means the recitation.
Yeah.
So a translation of the Quran is just not the Quran from a Muslim perspective, because the Quran is the pure recitation in Arabic, which has a certain cadence and rhythm to it. And it's like, okay, my analogy here is, imagine trying to share your favorite song with somebody by just having them read the lyrics off Google, not knowing what the tune sounds like, right? That wouldn't communicate what the song is in the same way. An English translation of the Quran cannot properly translate what the Quran is.
Yeah. Now, do you know Arabic? Have you learned through that?
Shway. I'm working on it.
Okay. So with that origin story of Muhammad, I mean, one thing we didn't dig into is this is 500-600 years after Jesus. In a brief summary, I mean, who is he and how did he come to lead this, like you said, the biggest non-Christian perspective and following in the world?
Yeah. So Muhammad is born in the year 570. So that's basically 540 years after the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. And he grows up as an orphan, and he is known as being an honest and trustworthy man in the town of Mecca, where he grows up, which is kind of according to the Islamic sources, Mecca is the sort of center of the Arabian polytheistic religion. And these polytheistic tribes will come to Mecca and make offerings to the many idols at a place called the Kaaba. And the Muslims claim the Kaaba was established by Abraham and Ishmael. I don't believe that personally, but that's what Muslims believe. And then it was eventually taken over by paganism. And this is where Muhammad grows up. And Muhammad is a merchant, and he's hired by a wealthy woman called Khadija to go on a caravan journey to Syria. And she's so impressed by his competence and his honesty that she proposes marriage to him when he gets back. And Muhammad marries Khadija, and they have daughters together. They lose a couple sons in childbirth, which is kind of common for the time, but they have a happy life. And then one day Muhammad is praying in a cave, because he's already convinced that there's only one God. He doesn't believe in the polytheism that surrounds him. And as he's praying, an entity appears to him and says, "Iqra," which means recite. And he says, I don't know how. Then it squeezes him so hard he feels like he's going to die. And then again it says Ikra, I don't know how. The same thing happens again. And then the third time it says Ikra. Then he begins to recite the words of the Quran. He goes home very disturbed by this to his wife Khadija, and he says, cover me, Khadija, because I've been possessed by the spirit of a jinn or a poet. And Khadija calms him down, and then she reaches out to her uncle Waraka, who is a Christian priest. And Waraka and Khadija convince Muhammad that he's actually been selected by God to be a prophet to his nation, the nation of the Arabs, in the same way the previous prophets had been sent to the Jews.
Yeah.
And so for the first few years, Muhammad is communicating this message of monotheism to this small group of people around him. And eventually that becomes public. And as it becomes public, it starts to become very controversial, because he's speaking to a town which has its entire livelihood in the making and selling of idols and sacrifices. And he's saying, there's one God, he's invisible, there's no statue of him, and there's no... so it's bad for business. It's ruining all their traditions, and they're worried about losing the ways of their fathers and forefathers. So then he keeps preaching under some sort of persecution. His followers are persecuted, but he's kind of immune to that, because his uncle, Abu Talib, while not being a Muslim himself, loves Muhammad and believes he's a trustworthy man. And Khadija is prominent and powerful, so he's basically untouchable in the tribal system, but his followers are not. So he's preaching about monotheism, he's preaching about social justice and care for the poor. And honestly, at this stage in Muhammad's life, there's actually very little for a Christian to disagree with. If you measure Muhammad by a biblical standard, he's doing almost everything right. He's a one-woman man. He's preaching monotheism against polytheism. He's teaching care for the poor and social responsibility. And he's using persuasion, not coercion at this point. Right? Everything he's doing is within the bounds of what a Christian could say, hey, this is good. Maybe he's on his way to the truth here. But unfortunately for Muhammad, in the year 619, both Khadija and Abu Talib die, which is dangerous for him because he's now left without his protection. So for the next, 2.5 years, he's in a dangerous situation. But because Mecca is a center of idolatry, different tribes will come for the pilgrimage, including a tribe of people from a town called Yathrib. And Yathrib is a town which is half Arabian polytheists and half Jews. And the Jews have apparently been teaching that there is a prophet coming. And when that prophet comes, that the Jews will regain their former prominence and be strong again. And according to the earliest biography of Muhammad, everybody's scared that the Jews are going to have dominance. So when the Arabs of Yathrib hear that Muhammad is a prophet, they say, if we embrace him first, this will stop the Jews from ruling over us. And so they embrace him and invite him to come and move to Yathrib, which is later known as Medina. So Medina is now the sort of name of the city today, which is literally short for Medina al-Nabi, which means the city of the prophet. That's why it's called Medina. Medina just means city. So, but he makes them agree. He gets another revelation that says, if I come to Medina, you not only have to agree to follow me as a prophet, but you actually have to accept me as master and fight for me as well. So he essentially makes them accept him as head of state as well as a prophet. And so in 622, Muhammad moves to Medina, and this is the start of the Islamic calendar. And most of Islam gets formulated kind of in this era in a lot of ways. The things which make it distinctive, like having a state, the Friday prayers are established in this, and because Khadijah has died, Muhammad now remarries, but Muhammad remarries, starts with marrying two women, a woman called Sauda and a woman called Aisha. People get on me for saying a woman named Aisha. Aisha, according to the Sunni Islamic sources, was 9 years old when Muhammad consummated the marriage with her. Like, some Muslims will argue about those sources, and my kind of take on this is that if you look at the Islamic sources, this is a common practice of the day. So it's not something uniquely bad about Muhammad that this is happening. So I'm not here to argue about that. It's been argued to death, but that's the sort of third woman Muhammad marries. So Khadijah dies, he marries two women, and eventually that number grows to about 9 to 13, depending on the source you use.
Yeah,
and so from there, Muhammad starts raids on the Quraysh trade caravans to kind of get their stuff back. And then the Quraysh come and try and attack him 3 times. And Muhammad defeats them the first time. He loses the second time at the Battle of Uhud. But then when they come all the way to Medina, the Muslims dig a trench, outmaneuver the Quraysh, and basically break their military power. They make a treaty to stop the war. And then Muhammad spends the next 2 years sending out missionaries, raiding parties, armies, and basically becomes the overlord of all Arabia. And then, according to the Muslims, the Quraysh break the treaty. Then Muhammad surrounds Mecca with an army of 10,000 men. And then it mostly peacefully submits. And Muhammad is the overlord of all Arabia.
How long does he live at that point? So that's 622-ish, 623 or 4-ish. How much longer does he live after that?
So Muhammad died in 632.
Okay.
And so I believe he died 2 years after the conquest of Mecca.
But where do you get doctrine from? Is it from the Quran alone? Or it seems like sometimes there's even figures that may say one thing and another kind of, I don't know if that's where the Shiites and the Sunnis come from. What is the Hadith for somebody who doesn't really understand that part of it?
Hadiths are the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Famous quotations, if you will. Now, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he himself was illiterate, so he did not read nor did he write. The doctrine of our religion comes from both the Quran and the body of Hadith. Okay. So it comes from both the Quran and the Hadith. So through Gabriel or directly through God, he received revelation. Now, the way he lived his life was informed by God's revelations. The way he lived his life was through an understanding that he had unique with God. And so the way he lived, his sayings have been captured by his companions, by his apostles, and they were put into a book, right? And those are the hadiths. So that provides context to the Quran. So the Quran tells us, hey, you've got to pray. And you have to pray multiple times a day. The Hadith tells us how we should pray, how we should wash ourselves before we pray. What are the exceptions to praying? How, we should pray, when we travel. And what are the motions in prayer itself, right? So the Quran provides the overarching understanding. The Hadith provide the details.
So you have, it sounds like a message from God that is the belief, that is the Quran, that nobody really argues about. But then it gets to different viewpoints with different hadiths. And I guess if you could kind of compare this with your knowledge of, there are disagreements within Christianity where we say you're not a Christian anymore is when you deny the essentials of the nature of God and how to be made right by Him, grace through faith. So what is kind of the balance of that? It seems like there's been wars, I believe, to my understanding, and certainly strong disagreements between different groups within Islam. Are these major doctrinal things that they're calling each other not Muslim because of it? Or are these more minor, non-essential things that are disagreed upon?
Depends on which war and which group. But let's start with the obvious one, which is the Sunni-Shia divide. So one thing that you're going to see when you look at the Quran is it's kind of assuming a lot of knowledge from its audience in a lot of ways. So it will say, remember this story here. Like, so there's a surah, for example, called Surah Al-Fil, which is describing an event about an elephant, which Muslims generally believe is the king of Ethiopia coming to destroy the Kaaba, and then being birds raining stones from the sky and stopping the elephant from coming to the Kaaba, which is the year Muhammad was born. Now, the Quran does not explicitly say that, and nor does the Hadith, actually. But so what you need to do is you have to have this other set of material which gives context to what the Quran is actually saying. So the Hadith is one way of constructing that narrative. Now, to be clear, the Hadith are not written at the time of Muhammad. The Hadith are written more than 200 years after Muhammad. And basically what's happening is people are, passing on these oral traditions about what Muhammad said and did. And then in the Abbasid Caliphate, people develop a methodology of trying to figure out which ones are reliable and which ones are made up. And one way of doing that is by doing something called an isnad chain, which is, tracing these things back to Muhammad. So not every Muslim believes every hadith. Most Orthodox Sunnis will believe in a collection called the Sitta Hadith, which is Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Sunan Abu Dawud, and some others that I can't go into details on right now. But the biggest ones for most Sunnis are Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, right? These are considered kind of good as gold. Functionally, they're scripture for Sunni Muslims. They don't believe that they're inspired in the same way the Quran is, although some of them are, according to them. There's a category called Hadith Qudsi, which means the words of Allah spoken through Muhammad. So the Quran is like, there's no Muhammad in there, according to Muslims. But in Hadith Qudsi, you have Muhammad, right? So the Sunnis generally believe these Hadith. The Shia, on the other hand, do not believe most of these Hadith, or at least question their authenticity, because immediately after Muhammad's death, there's a disagreement about who should be the leader of the Muslim community. So his cousin and son-in-law Ali, as his closest relative and the father of Muhammad's only grandchildren, believes that he should be the leader of the Muslims, or at least believes he should have a say in the government. Now, I know Sunnis are going to say, you're repeating a Shia narrative here. Ali was always supportive of Abu Bakr, and that is absolutely not true, according to Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. Ali later did become supportive of Abu Bakr and Omar and Uthman in their caliphates, but initially he believed that he should be the caliph. Whereas Sunnis believe that Abu Bakr should have been the first caliph, which, not that he was appointed as successor, but the community as a whole was supposed to choose their leader. Okay. So there's all sorts of doctrinal divergences between Sunni and Shia Islam because they don't have the same set of traditions that give context to the Quran. So if you want to know what Sunnis draw from, like Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, whereas Shias draw something from Najul Balagha, which is the sayings of and sermons of Ali, theoretically. And so you can see a lot of overlap there, but you also see differences as well, and it's just sort of formulated differently.
What is the functional difference today? I mean, obviously a big disagreement on history, but how does that look different for them today in practices?
So there are slight differences in prayer. So Shias often kind of combine the 5 daily prayers into 3 prayers. They have some sort of stone that they use in their prayers. That's going to feel different. You've got different holidays as well. Shia have something called Ashura, where they mourn the death of Ali's son, Hussein. But most of it, you're not going to find on a kind of like day-to-day level, but it's going to depend on who the heroes and who the villains are, which can get into sort of heated arguments.
Yeah.
So, if you imagine being in church and we have, let's say, let's talk about the apostles. You have those factions in, I suppose we have these people sometimes, but it's like basically people believing that Paul is the arch villain of Christian history, and you're at a party, and then and you're talking about how much you like the book of Romans, and then somebody just starts and says, no, Paul was evil, he was the corrupter of Christianity, he ruined everything, we can't believe anything that he said.
Wow.
Now, does that change absolutely everything about what we believe? No, but like it's going to feel very different if we're trying to have we don't have a shared sense of history in a lot of ways, right? We would have a shared sense of history up to a certain point, and then it's like completely divergent, which can lead to people getting very upset with each other.
Now, what about the foundational differences between Islam and Christianity? Namely, who is God? Many have said that we have the same God, as they're both Abrahamic religions. But does God function the same? That's the next study guide episode here with Between Beliefs.